Hello everyone, this is your friend Sai Yan Paradox Audio Fanfic. What if Raditz escaped death? The Dragon Ball timeline was rewritten. Part 2. Kid, you are too much trouble. He snarled, before unleashing the attacks. Gohan saw the two red bolts flying towards him and just stared for a moment, at least dodging to the side as they exploded behind him. Raditz was already upon him once he regained his footing, swinging his huge leg in a violent kick which caught Gohan in the shoulder, sending the boy flipping through the air and slamming into a building. Pathetic. Raditz spat. It was then he heard two voices shout something. Kamehameha. Looking up, he saw two blue bolts blasting towards him. They collided directly with Raditz, blasting a hole in the ground around him, forming a crater and exploding into the street nearby, causing the road to be torn apart. In the heart of the explosion, however, Raditz could be heard chuckling. "You are even weaker than that boy," he said with his arms crossed. He looked savage, blood trickling from his mouth, his clothes annihilated almost, his body covered in scrapes and cuts, but he was still there. His power had diminished some, but nothing radical. Krillin and Yamcha immediately looked nervous. His power had grown significantly since his battle with Goku and Piccolo. They'd felt the clash between he and Piccolo and knew what they were getting into. Tien was hovering nearby. "He can't stop all of us at once." "Can't I?" Raditz responded arrogantly. "Please. Don't make me laugh. The four of you would barely be able to stop that green fool back there. You don't stand a chance against me. But I encourage you to try. Entertain me." The wind gently blew over where Piccolo now lay. Gohan landed next to him just as the other four fighters went flying towards Raditz. A whirlwind of blows now flowed around him as he dodged, blocked and fought Tien, Yamcha, Chiatsu, and Krillin all at once. "Mr. Piccolo, are you going to be alright?" Piccolo didn't respond. "Please, Mr. Piccolo, you've gotta get up, we need you," Gohan further urged. When Piccolo's eyes slowly opened, the once evil half of Kami looked at the desperately worried Gohan before giving a half smile, hearing the others fighting in the background. Piccolo managed to sit up, even with a groan, before standing on his feet, looking up to the struggle which had now ascended into the air. Raditz dodged and blocked every attack incoming, furious by the four fighters who would have all been equal with him a year ago. Clearly, Raditz's near-death experience had greatly improved his power. The only one there who could stop him now was Piccolo, and he knew it. "Raditz, we aren't done yet," Piccolo declared. Raditz's eyes traced to Piccolo as he blocked a flurry of blows from Tien. With a smirk, he kicked the three-eyed warrior in the side of the head, sending him flying down towards the city. Turning, he began unleashing his wrath on the others. Punching Yamcha so hard in the stomach the warrior just fell from the sky, and kneeing Krillin, sending him flying into the dome of a nearby building, breaking through both sides. He only had to stare at Chiatsu for a moment, before the pale fighting flew after his three-eyed friend. Perhaps now he'd finally get the respect he deserved from Nappa and Vegeta. He'd survived a year on this mud ball, collected the Dragon Balls, his power must have doubled. He was starting to sense powers even without a scouter. He was a true Saiyan warrior, and the only threat on this planet was about to be finally soundly defeated and violently expunged. He crossed his arms arrogantly as he stared down at the fighter, his smile growing by the second, imagining his status and glory. "Oh, and what business is that? More I-beams. You can't handle this fight anymore. Perhaps if some of these other fighters weren't so pathetic just now, you'd have stood a chance. But what exactly are you going to do?" He chuckled. Two new arms tore out from the stubs on Piccolo's arms. Raditz didn't register this for several moments as continued to chuckle, before raising one eyebrow inquisitively, while the rest of his face slowly warped to one of disbelief. No, that's not possible," he said quietly to himself. Before an aura seemed to glow around Piccolo's body, the earth began to rumble as finally Piccolo began to concentrate his energy, his ki, his body brimmed with power. Kami must have been helping him, Piccolo realized. He cannot be allowed to have the Dragon Balls. That was all he heard in his mind, before feeling pure strength flowing through his veins. With a blur of speed, Piccolo appeared below Raditz, smashing his elbow into his stomach. The shocked Saiyan heaved with pain, still in disbelief that Piccolo had regrown his arms before him. Taking back his position, two golden energy bolts began forming in Piccolo's hands, wrapped in electricity as well. Go to hell, Raditz. Explosive demon wave. The two bolts came together, before the massive, traumatic attack blasted into him. It was the same one Piccolo had attacked him with the day they'd met. Whereas before it had near no effect, now it overwhelmed him. Golden energy burned across his body as he found himself caught in the beam. The remains of his clothes began burning away, as his flesh waxed and waned, nearly causing his own permanent demise. Rahhhhh. The pain was overwhelming, before he felt himself being carried violently away by this attack. No, were the last words uttered by Raditz, before it carried him past the city, past the West Mountain Range, and crashing into a small lake, now a village, causing the lake to separate for him on impact, before the waters came rushing back in, huge waves hitting the normally peaceful shoreline. When the water came rushing back in, Raditz's power was so depleted he could barely swim for his life, barely managing to reach the shoreline. TV guides and reference. A trembling hand pulled him ahead for a moment once he was on the sandy ground. His entire frame hurt, his body ached and stung and burned. Within a second, his face hit the sand before passing out as the waves of water splashed against his legs from the now calming lake. Opening parenthesis, closing parenthesis, 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 opening parenthesis, closing parenthesis. West City. Piccolo hovered there, his body heaving from the Herculean effort he'd just exerted. His legs fumbled in the air helplessly. He'd spent so much energy he could no longer fly. He fell to earth, landing on his feet with a crash. Falling to one knee, he just breathed in and out. Mr. Piccolo, you did it, Gohan said brightly. No, I didn't, he said, looking up with an annoyed, exhausted look. He's alive. There was a woman watching the scene, her blue eyes wide with terror at what she'd just witnesses. It was called siding with the wrong team, and Violet knew all too well what that could mean. Piccolo finally managed to get to his feet. You'll give up the Dragon Balls now. Without a word, the 5 Dragon Balls in their satchel fell to the ground, before she turned to begin sprinting away as fast as she could. When the world came alive once again for Raditz, it awakened with a flash of bright light. Instinctively he raised his hand to intercept the offending light, only to realize his arms were bandaged heavily. He felt something soft underneath his back. Carefully he traced his face, feeling yet another few bandages over his skin. His eyes shifted finally, looking about the room as he took in where he was. It was a simple room, a closet, clearly a bed, plain walls save for a few pictures, and a few other basic furnishings. It was a human dwelling, but why was he here? Then he remembered. Explosive demon wave. The pain had been excruciating. He'd felt the power that Piccolo had brought with him in those last moments, he'd surpassed his own power and he knew it. But he was a Saiyan, and every battle, every struggle, only would increase his power in the long term. However, if the Green Man had managed to match his new strength within a year, even from the much inferior position he'd been in before, he knew he'd have to find out how. It was madness that he was forced off, defeated yet again, by the same adversary, especially when he'd overmatched him both times. The Dragon Balls. How much time had passed? Where was he beyond the confines of this room? It was then that the door slowly opened. A small girl's frame stepped through the door. Her simple dress and black pigtails were the most noticeable thing about her. The child walked over cautiously, before smiling. Awake, she said enthusiastically. Dad, the man from the lake is awake, she called. Raditz started trying to sit up, before pain exploded in his ribs. Damn, that damned green bastard had crippled him up badly. He sat back again with a frustrated groan before the man of the house walked in. He was clearly used to living in the outskirts of human colonization, given his thick beard, substantial muscles and overall rugged look. Thank you very much, Apella. Now go to your mother. Okay, she said, rushing past her father before he approached Raditz. You nearly drowned in that lake, he said to the Saiyan warrior. Raditz didn't respond at first. Even in this weakened state he could easily kill this human pest. However, that served little purpose for the moment. This human was clearly attempting to nurse him back to health, the fool. He had no idea that he and his entire family would be annihilated due to their foolishness. His stare continued to look through the man. Yes, I must have, Raditz responded. Well, we here in the village fished you out. Not much around here, and we don't have much, but we'll get you well enough before we send you on your way, he told Raditz. There was a nod from the Saiyan in response. Of course. Opening parenthesis closing parenthesis 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 opening parenthesis closing parenthesis. It felt good to finally have a bed, instead of patches of rock's hard ground. The hotel had been cheap enough. Violet just enjoyed the feeling of freedom she'd earned. Working and living with that alien had been too stressful, every moment worried his fickle mood would shift and he'd kill her. She wasn't even completely sure why he'd spared her so long. If she wasn't sure she'd have been killed by him if she tried to escape, she'd have made off with the Dragon Balls themselves. Still, she could put all this behind her now. She was at last able to relax and put her feet up. Her weapons were ruined, but she could get more. She just needed to take out a job or two and she'd have everything she needed. Surprisingly, before all this she'd started to get tired of the cycle of boom and bust, being subservient to a giant brutal alien intent on killing everyone and selling the planet, after obtaining eternal life, however, was much worse. It was amazing how you could come about to appreciate what you once had. Suddenly there was a knock at the door. The exhausted Violet ignored it, until she heard the knock again. Who is it? She heard muffled behind the door. That sound like her. Sure does. Shit. Violet muttered. Within seconds gunfire tore through the door, rippling through the bed and bursting through the walls. The door fell forward just from the fire which had been pumped through it as 4 men walked in. Confirm the target is dead. That way we can get our reward for her head. She should have showed up on time with that Dragon Ball. Violet, for her part, had ducked under the fire, under a nearby table. The room was still dark. She saw her attackers and her blue eyes narrowed on them like a terrible weapon in and of themselves. These men were dead. Flanking them, one turned to check the bathroom. As he did, she carefully moved up behind him, slinking through the shadows. She needed his gun. Moving up from behind, she grabbed him by his jaw and top of his mouth, so he would make as little noise as possible. The sound of the neck popping out of place was all that was heard. Even that was quiet before she dropped his frame quietly to the side. Pulling up his automatic submachine gun, Violet prepared herself. She was still in her underwear right now. It frustrated her to no end that she'd be fighting like this. She was a professional after all. "Hey Tomat, you there man?" one of them asked. Tom. Just as the next one rounded the corner, the violent crack of the rounds leaving the barrel of her gun was heard a half-dozen times. She traced the spray up the center of his body, the first round ripping through him at the groin, and the last one at the neck. He only gurgled briefly as blood stained through his clothes and messily dripped to the floor. His entire frame dropped as the blood began to pool. Shit. That's her. Bang. Another shot from her gun eliminated the source of the sound as she fired it through the drywall. Based off the cry of terror that followed, she knew the other man had been right next to him. She began firing rounds into the wall near where the other had been. "Oh by Cammy. I give up. Please." His gun slid across the floor in front of her as he came into view, looking panicked. She could see the pistol hidden in his sleeve and knew full well he was just trying to lull her into a false security. "I give up. No loose ends. Sorry." Bang. Before his arm could even reflex, she'd shot him in the chest. He fell back, heaving desperately for air as the blood began pooling on his insides. The round hadn't come out the other side. Violet started to pack her things. "Thanks for not getting any blood on my bag," she said simply, half ignoring the dying man before getting dressed. Unceremoniously, before she left, she stomped his neck in. It was rather grisly. She heard the police sirens outside and knew she had to be gone quickly. It was then she started to realize she wasn't even going to get another good night's sleep. Opening parenthesis, closing parenthesis, 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 opening parenthesis, closing parenthesis. It had been humiliating. What chance we do have against these Saiyans if we could barely touch Raditz? Yamcha finally said, looking down, as if he was a picture of despondency. "I've been telling you guys that for months," Yajirobe said simply. Tien didn't want to hear this anymore, all the negative talk since the fight outside the Capsule Corporation. He'd been enraged, training even harder since it had happened, but he knew it was a problem of time. They only had a few weeks left until the Saiyans arrived according to Cammy. He'd given it all, he really had. He was stronger than he'd ever felt, and he knew for a fact he was stronger than Raditz had been when he first arrived on Earth. He couldn't even understand how Raditz had improved so much in such a short time. Was he training as well? That had to be it. As the minutes ticked by, the negative conversation taking place on the lookout hadn't helped his mood. He was still training, he was still improving. "Look guys, we don't have a choice in all this," Krillin pointed out. "This isn't a fight we get to pick, we have to, and we have to win, or the entire world is doomed." The monk Krillin knew all too well what it was to be made a martyr, having fought King Piccolo's minion and falling to him. It was terrible. It was violent, and he'd never want to repeat it. But what would have happened if King Piccolo and his minions had won? The world would have been cast into darkness. It had to happen. Krillin was particularly disappointed that Yamcha was descending into negativity, because he knew better. But look what he did to us down there. I thought I was so much stronger, but then bam, he. Shut up. Tien finally cut in, ceasing his training. Don't you all get it? We've got to fight, there isn't an option. They'll kill everyone if we can't stop them. I for one would give my life to save our home. Yamcha stood up. He didn't want to give his life at all. He wanted to get through this alive, however he nodded to his friend Tien. You're right, Tien. It's just, I have a lot to live for, like, Bulma. And don't you think Bulma would be dead if we lost anyway? Krillin cut in. Yamcha just looked away. Yay, I guess you're right. I just thought we'd improved so much and we were ready. I just think we got a rude awakening. Yamcha admitted. Which is why we've gotta give this everything we've got. Krillin said. If we hold back anything, we're finished. Let's just hope Goku can come through with his training from King Kai's. Yajirobe added. Opening parenthesis closing parenthesis 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 opening parenthesis closing parenthesis. Gohan was exhausted. They'd been training for days now, ever since Raditz was defeated. Piccolo's confidence had gone up as well, his entire being seemed to exhibit this confidence. After all, he'd managed to defeat Raditz, overpowering the Saiyan warrior. Still, Gohan knew that he needed to improve to catch up to Piccolo. As the two sparred again, Piccolo pushed him yet further on. Gohan, you have to keep up. Piccolo demanded. Right. Another flurry of vicious punches came from the young boy, before he finally managed to land a well-placed kick on Piccolo's head, sending the green demon back, but with a smile. Gohan knew it was soon, the Saiyans would be there soon and he had to be ready. He'd not been prepared the last time, but this time he would be. He still missed his mom, Chi-Chi, and his father, Goku, but knew that he'd get to see them soon. After this was all over, he could finally go back to trying to be a normal boy, and saving his adventures for weekends. He wondered just how life would be different though, different than it was. He hoped he'd made his father proud. Piccolo was almost like a second father to him now in many respects, and he also hoped he'd make Piccolo proud. With that thought, however, Piccolo slapped him down again, this time moving his first to his head once he was down, but not striking. Gohan, pay attention, Piccolo ordered. Now, again. Opening parenthesis closing parenthesis 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 opening parenthesis closing parenthesis. 3 weeks later, Raditz was finally mobile. His body healed enough to move about under its own power. He was still a bit worse for wear, but thankfully he'd not been as badly injured as he'd been in his first battle. The severity of his wounds was overall lower, however he felt stiff. He'd been provided clothes, donated to him by the villagers, something yet more strange. Just a simple pair of their jeans and a buttoned shirt. The kindness of the humans to him was uncomfortable. They'd shared their meals with him without much expected in return. They never asked him for anything beyond that he get better. Worse yet, they provided him with as much care as they could, and he knew full well they'd even portioned their meals to attempt to feed him. It was so weak. It was almost pitiable. What was he thinking? It was pitiable, but it was a disgusting display of his own that worried him. Not 2 hours ago there had been an accident, a logging incident with one of the villagers. Everyone including Spade, the father of the house which Raditz was housed, had run off to try and help the man. Spade himself asked if Raditz would come. And here he was, stretching his muscles, by picking up the tree off the injured man. His leg looked badly broken, but salvageable. The townsfolk were shocked when they saw the display of strength. Several ran. It only figured. Their weakness was so glaring obvious they'd never seen something as simple as lifting a 100-foot-high tree with one's bare hands before. He tossed the log aside before staring at Spade, who was one of the few who hadn't run. The man's daughter was clutching his leg as she looked towards Raditz as well. "Thank you," Spade said, looking slightly nervous. Raditz just flinched with a sense of disdain. Quote, was the response from the Saiyan. He had decided to spare these people, for now. When Vegeta and Nappa got here it wouldn't matter all the same. He'd kill all of these people once they got here, and Violet, and anyone else who had to die. He felt his hand ball into a fist briefly before he began to hover. Spade just swallowed nervously. "Thank you, for saving him. You won't thank me soon," Raditz said, before blasting in the air. Spade for his part had never even asked the stranger for his name, because they would help anyone who came to their village. It was the right thing to do after all. Opening parenthesis closing parenthesis 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 opening parenthesis closing parenthesis. Master Roshi looked at the 7 pulsing Dragon Balls, his old frame holding his cane as he looked at them. Bulma had been very shaken up about what happened at Capsule Corp, but everyone was thankful Dr. Briefs and his wife Mrs. Briefs were all right. She was here now, however, along with Oolong and Puar. It was then that he began hearing something, as if from the distance. It sounded like Goku. Opening parenthesis closing parenthesis 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 opening parenthesis closing parenthesis. Raditz stopped in mid-air, looking down at West City, near the Capsule Corporation building. Human machines were in the process of repairing it frantically. The dragon radar had been left with Violet, so the first thing he knew he needed to do was find her. The next thing he needed to do was get back on the track of getting those Dragon Balls. Vegeta and Nappa would arrive soon and he needed something to show for his year-long run on this planet. He didn't even want to mention he'd been humiliated, twice. Vegeta would probably dispose of him on the spot. However, he wondered just where the hell the woman was. Idly, he heard human sirens in the background, and looked down at flashing lights at the base of a building. Something piqued his interest, including a familiar presence. Zipping towards the area, he stopped in mid-air, looking down. Opening parenthesis closing parenthesis 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 opening parenthesis closing parenthesis. Two dead bodies lay near Violet. One set with their brains leaking out, another with his body torn open by bullets. The police had cornered them. It was a simple damn plan, her first time back in action since the Dragon Ball hunt. But, it looked like it was a matter of wrong place, wrong time. With all the charges they'd be able to stick her with, she may as well have gotten killed in the shootout, rather than risking arrest. She had too many enemies on the inside of the jails as well. Surrender. Come out now and you'll get a fair trial. Fair. She'd only come out if she got a biased trial, in her favor. With a cold look about her, she turned, placing her pistol on the edge of the teller's counter she was hiding behind, firing 2 rounds. The immediate response from the police was overwhelming. Automatic weapons fire riddled the bank's service counter. Rounds punctured the wooden counter easily even as Violet took cover. A round grazed her shoulder, and another made a direct hit. Her leg exploded with pain. She looked down as her head shifted back in agony. She felt the wound, hissing as she did, no vital arteries damaged. She prepared herself, propping her back against another counter, attempting to get a better position to fire from. This was likely her last chance to make a dent in the force out there. There must have been 50 cops out there, including SWAT. She noticed a gas container being fired at the front entrance. However, from the loudspeaker she heard, "Hey, who the hell are you?" Then there was a massive series of blasts. The first one was accompanied by cries of fear. Carefully she popped her head over the counter as weapons fire rattled out, followed by more explosions. The gas from the canister was blocking her view. It was her time to go. She looked back at the vault they'd broken into, then down to her leg. Shit. No time to get any money out of the vault. Hobbling, she tried to make a break for the exit, just as the weapon's fire was dying down. When she hit the cloud she started to cough, the tear gas making itself known to her. Her eyes burned as well before she managed to hobble to the side of the smoke cloud. Outside looked like a world war. Police bodies lay scattered, some missing limbs even, their cars burning wrecks as well. She just started to breathe in fresh air, attempting to regain herself before more police arrived. Then there was a familiar voice. "Hello, woman." She looked up, way up, into the air. Hovering there was none other than Raditz. Raditz. He landed in front of her, appraising her briefly, noting her wounds, before looking up at her. "Where are my Dragon Balls?" Of course that was why he was there. For a moment she deluded herself almost that he'd come back to collect her. They'd made a fairly reasonable team, He was the brawn and she was the brains. Though he neglected her good plans most of the time, and just muscled his way through everything. King Piccolo took them. Raditz just intensified his glare further. He approached her briefly, looking down at her. You gave him the Dragon Balls? He asked, her voice irritated and rough. I like to think I used them as a distraction to make a cunning escape, was the response. Where is the radar? Raditz asked. Broken. Raditz felt the urge to kill, an urge that clearly wasn't satiated by the police's deaths. Violet didn't flinch when his form changed to one of very acute anger. His whole body looked tense and his features looked gripped with anger. I'm not lying, Raditz, she said, looking away with a bored look. Raditz started to hover, just as more sirens were heard. Violet looked in the direction of the sound, and then realized Raditz was leaving, without her. Hey, her voice sounded for the first time, mildly nervous. You aren't going to leave me behind. Get down here and pick me up, she ordered coldly. Raditz blinked, noting the authority in her voice. It was strange, but this woman was as ruthless, cunning, and brutal as almost any Saiyan he'd met, even before the destruction of planet Vegeta. One reason he'd spared her, despite her attitude, had to be that the sirens implied human law enforcement. Given the state of her wound, and her likely crimes, leaving her behind would mean certain death. But so what? She couldn't help him find any more Dragon Balls, she was of no use to him. What would they do exactly? She had extremely limited fighting potential as well. Being strong for a human meant being a completely useless weakling. He noted her look nervously in distance at the coming law enforcement officers again, this time checking the rounds in her primitive weapons. Sneering angrily with himself, Raditz landed next to Violet, grabbing her roughly, before taking off. Opening parenthesis closing parenthesis 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 opening parenthesis closing parenthesis. The 7 Dragon Balls gathered, pulsing with power. The eternal dragon rose towards the sky above Roshi's island. Opening parenthesis closing parenthesis 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 opening parenthesis closing parenthesis. The skies turned black. Piccolo looked around briefly, Gohan at his side. Mr. Piccolo, what's happening? This storm sure came on quickly. It's no storm, Gohan. They've summoned the dragon, which means 2 things. The Saiyans will be here soon, and Goku is being wished back to life. Gohan's smile opened up at the thought of his father coming back, but then frowned at the realization that the Saiyans would be coming as well. Be ready, Piccolo said, looking ahead as his eyes steeled. This was it, all their training was to be put to the ultimate test soon. Raditz, and 2 other Saiyans. Opening parenthesis closing parenthesis 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 opening parenthesis closing parenthesis. Tien, Krillin, Chiatsu, Yahirobe and Yamcha stood next to Popo and Kami. They could all see the dragon's rise. The Saiyans will be here tomorrow. Be prepared, Kami told them. Your training here is done. The fighters nodded, taking off in their different directions. One day until the apocalypse. Opening parenthesis closing parenthesis 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 opening parenthesis closing parenthesis. Raditz for his part looked at the black sky as lightning bolted about. He was confused by the freak weather change as he stood on the side of the mountain he'd come to rest on. Violet looked up at the sky, looking nervous. What is it? I've heard rumor when the sky turns black, the whole world round, it means the eternal dragon Shenron has been summoned. Raditz froze, turning towards her. What? No. They can't have summoned the dragon. I just said it's rumored. Violet said, raising her hands defensively. Raditz looked towards the sky as it began to clear, going from instant night and storms to day, with the bright sun showing through. Shit. He would bet his life that meant they'd summoned the dragon. Opening parenthesis closing parenthesis 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 opening parenthesis closing parenthesis. Two pods came into the Earth's orbit before hitting the atmosphere, burning brightly as they entered the atmosphere. Descending eventually into East City, they slamming through a massive office building, causing the entire structure to come crashing down. Fire and smoke billowed from the ruined building as the two pods slammed into the street, causing two huge craters. Crowds gathered and peered in, watching as two figures slowly emerged. Vegeta stretched slightly after the long journey, a smirk written across his face. So this is Earth, what an ugly piece of rock and mud it is. Yay! Look at all these ugly weak maggots looking at us. Nappa said, referring to the crowd gawking at the sight of the two aliens. Vegeta just continued to smirk cunningly. I think it's time we sent a message. Nappa, why don't you choose the attack? Nappa just started to chuckle, gathering energy into his hand, before releasing it in the form of an exploding wave. The wave erupted all around him, so much power it turned everything white. And in the blink of an eye, over 75% of East City and its inhabitants were leveled. When the light dimmed, and the shock waves stopped, all that remained were Nappa, Vegeta, and their space pods. Vegeta felt irritated within seconds. This idiot had just leveled the entire city, when there could have been a Dragon Ball in it. Nappa, do you remember when we discussed the Dragon Balls? Vegeta asked, looking irritating. Yay, of course. Those are gonna let us wish for eternal life. Yes, Nappa, Vegeta answered with annoyance. And how will we do that if you just blew up a city with a Dragon Ball in it? Nappa stopped smiling, realizing his error. Sorry Vegeta, I wasn't thinking. Clearly it's my fault. I told you to do the thinking for once and look what it got us. There is no going back now, however, what's done is done. Now then, let's start looking at the powers on this planet. Nappa chuckled. Let's see if that weakling Raditz is still alive. Nappa blinked as he continued scanning. No way. There are more than a half-dozen powers on this planet, over 1,000, and 2 bigger ones, both around 3,500. Nappa read out loud. Vegeta looked at the scouter. Well, it would seem there may be an excuse for that miserable Raditz after all, if he's alive. Now then, let's trail one of those power levels of 3,500. We need our warm-up, Vegeta said with sarcasm. 3,500 was nothing. It was much different than a scouter. On a scouter it was just a number. In many ways that was terrifying as well, but this was something completely different. Raditz could feel both Vegeta and Nappa's power levels, and it was astounding. He sent almost a tremor through his body, especially Vegeta. The shock waves of power from Nappa destroying the human city in the distance had been fantastic. He'd not seen anything like that since Antios, when Nappa blasted those bug men into atoms with that attack. They would come to take him back into the fold, he was sure of it. Especially when Vegeta saw his new strength. You should consider leaving this place, now, Raditz said. The side of the mountain, with this leg. Why don't you just fly us out of here? My comrades have arrived. I sincerely doubt you'll live long regardless. You are going to kill everyone on Earth, aren't you? Violet pointed out bluntly. I suspect that includes me, whether I am on the side of the mountain or the bottom of it. Raditz felt irritated, especially over the fact she wasn't listening to him. Though he really hated the fact she was right. Why do you care exactly anyway? I've been trying to figure that out for days, Raditz informed her bluntly, not sounding impressed, his voice mixed with annoyance. Violet started to smirk. She'd been dealing with men her entire lives, especially ego-driven muscle-bound idiots like Raditz. It was very convenient for her more than anything that she'd ran into Raditz now. He'd been her ticket out of West City, and as far as she was concerned, he was her ticket out of a genocide as well. Oh, I get it now. The genocidal maniac who sells planets claims he doesn't get why he's sparring someone. You are terrible at concealing your feelings, Violet said, sounding bored and disinterested almost as she spoke. Really, it was useful that the idiot seemed to care. She knew full well she'd manipulated him several times, including saving her from the police. Raditz's eyes went wide with surprise. She'd been more combative than ever since he'd picked her up from that bank in West City. Worse yet, he'd just allowed her to be combative. If he were smart, he'd have beaten that temperament out of her by now. But given she had no value, why would he beat her when he should just kill her? And now she was making claims that he held some kind of hidden feelings for her. Don't press me, woman, Raditz warned. Or what? You'll kill me, Violet dared. This planet was dangerous. Kakarot had been sucked into this world, and now sought only to protect it. Perhaps this world used some kind of strange talent from its human occupants to lure foreign, more powerful beings to its defense. Maybe that was why Spade helped him, or perhaps why this woman was driving him into insanity. He stared at her, convincing himself almost for a moment that Violet had used special powers on him, at the behest of planet Earth itself, to try and manipulate him to save itself. It was at that point Raditz started to think he was losing his mind. She'd been a fascinating creature from the moment he saw her execute half the people on that bus to get the Dragon Ball, and kill her own ally to gain more for herself. She was cunning and brutal, everything a Saiyan aspired to be in many senses. It was strange to see a human emulate these traits. The fact she didn't hurt to look at as well, obviously helped. This is the last time I'll warn you, woman. Get out of here before my comrades arrive, and you just might live. Before Violet could respond, making deals with the locals or we Raditz. Vegeta's voice somehow silenced everything. Raditz, before he responded verbally, knelt down on one knee. Prince Vegeta, he started, before looking up at Vegeta. I was wasting your time talking to this earthling. Tell me, Raditz, what have you accomplished in the last year? Vegeta asked harshly. He, of course, read Raditz's power level, but that was no excuse for the fact this planet was still brimming with humans. There was also no evidence so far that he had the Dragon Balls. Just what the hell had he been doing? Language resources. I was trying to gather the Dragon Balls, Prince Vegeta. Oh, and how many have you gathered? Raditz felt himself shrinking before Vegeta's scrutiny. Well, Prince Vegeta, I had almost all of the 7 balls. Had. Vegeta's voice was dangerous, and his features were looking less than impressed. Well, yes. You see, my prince, I lost them when I was ambushed by the defenders of the planet. And how many of them did you kill for this indiscretion against our agenda? Raditz normally would have said a dozen, were this any other world. He'd never been stopped from doing his mission without taking a bloody toll of his enemy. What did he have to show for it? He maimed a green man who healed himself. None. Prince Vegeta. Well, if you have failed at these things, at least you have eradicated most of them humans then. Vegeta already knew the answer. Nappa was starting to chuckle in the background as he smirked down at Raditz, implying he knew full well what kind of treatment Raditz was about to receive. I've killed tens of thousands of them, Prince Vegeta. So let's begin to appraise your performance over the last year. You've been defeated, multiple times, by weaklings. You've failed to gather my Dragon Balls, and you've failed to eradicate the humans, and I caught you just now trying to save one of them. Tell me, Raditz, one thing you've done other than increase your pathetic power level. Raditz was left at a loss of words over his prince's scathing appraisal. He knew full well he'd utterly failed, and expected the worst. Before he'd just expected a beating, now he was expecting an execution. He's done nothing but serve you the entire time, Violet cut in. He wouldn't even use the Dragon Balls for his own gain until you arrived. She added. Who is this woman to speak with me? I've been assisting Raditz gather the Dragon Balls, sir, Violet started to explain. Raditz turned to her, his eyes clearly from the expression on his face, telling her not to say another word. Oh, so you are equally responsible for this failure then? Or tell me, Raditz, is it all this human's fault? Vegeta mocked. It's not her fault, Prince Vegeta, Raditz immediately spoke up. I disagree. Raditz, kill the woman. Raditz felt himself freeze in that moment, his eyes looking at Vegeta and Nappa. Kill her. He felt his arms grow almost weak before he turned to her for a moment. There she was, propped against a rock, her leg bandaged from where she'd been shot by the primitive weapons on this world. She seemed resigned, before she smirked at Raditz. You always told me you'd get around to killing me eventually, she reminded Raditz. She could see now her plans to survive by being on Raditz's good side were hardly going to succeed. Even her survival instincts were not fooled by her normal optimistic view on how to get out of a situation. There was really no reason for him to die along with her, given he tried to avoid this outcome altogether. It was almost heroic of him. Raditz powered the energy blast, forming it in his hand, slowly pushing his hand out and preparing to fire. His face was stressed, unable to hide all his anxiety and distress over being forced to do this. Vegeta watched with the ice-cold eyes he'd been given from years of serving with Frieza. Raditz was troubled. It was clear to Vegeta that Raditz had developed feelings for this human. Nappa, Vegeta said, turning and smirking to him. Yay, Vegeta. Vegeta just nodded to him, giving his elder Saiyan a message without words. It was clear what he wanted done. Nappa started to chuckle, nodding back. Well, Raditz, Vegeta barked. Raditz turned about, facing towards his master. I don't see the point in killing this one, he finally said, almost defiantly. Are you disobeying my orders, Raditz? Vegeta asked, his eyes showing pure rage. He could see how weak Raditz was becoming. A few thousand humans. So what? They'd all killed billions, tens of billions. This world was making him soft. He couldn't function like this. Would he get all sentimental the next time he was asked to level a city? Oh please, don't make me level the schools, I don't like to massacre children. Or don't make me blow up the hospital. Vegeta's disgust was so apparent that Raditz couldn't find the words to answer. Colonel Violet's heart was racing now as she saw the big one looking at her, smiling with sinister intent. That was the same kind of look Raditz gave before he killed someone. And with that thought, there was a massive blast next to where she was resting against the rocks. An avalanche from above slid down, crashing down the mountainside. Raditz was knocked free from the blast by the wave which followed it. Hovering in the air, he turned to the smoldering rocks and sliding mountainside. He froze in horror, slowly realizing what just happened. His eyes never left where Violet should be. Now all that was there was rocks as the mountain slide finally stopped. He felt paralyzed. He couldn't speak. Failure will not be tolerated, Raditz. Vegeta said, his smirk returning to his features. Neither will weakness. The cancer had been cut out, and Raditz reminded of his place, as far as Vegeta was concerned. Get yourself in order, and meet us to finish off these humans which have given you so much trouble. Maybe you'll be able to redeem yourself. Opening parenthesis closing parenthesis 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 opening parenthesis closing parenthesis. A hooded figure stood near a pool of transparent energy in a dark room or space. Another two hooded figures across from him is the tallest and most familiar of the three. The one with the greenest skin scowled angrily. Vegeta wasn't supposed to do that. Opening parenthesis closing parenthesis 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 opening parenthesis closing parenthesis. With that, Vegeta felt his own power flowing towards rapid flight. Let's go crush the two strongest fools first, Nappa. Vegeta said to Nappa. With pleasure. With that, the pair took off, leaving Raditz behind. As they rocketed into the distance, Raditz immediately flew towards the shattered mountainside, pulling up rubble, tossing huge boulders aside and scattering fragmented rock with his energy, attempting to dig deeper to find where the tiny power had once been. It was taking too long. It was almost a half hour before he started to make real progress. Light broke through the darkness for the lone human inside the broken mountainside. Her lungs were filling with blood, each breath was becoming more and more difficult, more and more ragged. Her bullet wound in her leg was the least of her concerns, because now both her legs were broken, as was her right arm. She felt hot blood trickling down from her forehead and mouth, as well as hotly running down her sides. She was a bloody ruin. They'd not even been courteous enough to make it quick. Her eyes noted the figure that finally pulled the last boulder away. He just stood there, looking at her. His pride was too much that he couldn't kneel at her side. She weakly smiled. He'd gone through all the trouble of liberating her from the avalanche, but wouldn't go through the trouble of being near her side, which she could see he was fighting with himself to do. I'm dead, Raditz. She managed, her voice sounding thick with blood. You aren't dead yet, Raditz told her, sounding irritated, before finally kneeling next to the broken body. I'm sure this is nothing that can't be fixed. He didn't mention the broken bones, or the fragments of rock now sticking out of her. She was right, she was dead, and he knew she was too, but he just couldn't say it yet. Weakly, her only arm remaining unbroken, her left arm, moved out, grasping his hand for a moment. I didn't think dying would be this painful, she admitted, sounding irritated by that fact. Raditz looked at the hand quietly, before looking up at her. He knew all too well how painful death could be. He'd killed so many, in so many different ways, slowly or quickly. He couldn't even remember how he killed all of them. He'd massacred cities, planets, parents, children, it didn't matter. And it still didn't matter, even now. He didn't care about any of them or their foolish lives. It was this one that stuck, this one was the one he'd not wanted to see. He'd even fought off his pride to try and save her. Raditz. He didn't respond. I've killed a lot of people. Hundreds of people, she said weakly. I've killed people who thought they were my friends. I've used everyone to get more. You were my ticket to staying alive. I was going to make it. Survive. She smiled bitterly. A lot of good that did, she said, before a cough full of blood came up. Quote. Raditz's face was almost void of emotion as he watched the woman dying, making her final words to him. It wasn't because he was void of emotion, his insides felt cold, as if he couldn't quite keep something contained. You are a monster, Raditz, she finally whispered, her eyes filling with tears at the thought of her own death largely. But you were supposed to. Her eyes started to go dim, her head starting to nod off. Raditz moved his hand to support it, as if holding her head up would stop her from fading away. She had no more words, she was completely still. Woman, he asked quietly. The only response he received was the cold wind, blasting through the air on the mountain. Violet. He tried her name this time, something he never did. His voice is much more quiet this time, either he was in shock, or he'd lost his voice, he almost didn't hear the name pass his own lips. Raditz looked down at her hand, which had tried holding his only a minute ago. It was lifeless, off to the side. He felt something itching at his eyes as he knelt down there. It couldn't end like this. He decided that at that moment, carefully pulling the broken body into his arms, her head falling back without anything holding it in place. She was like a marionette with cut strings. With that, he took off, blasting towards West City. Opening parenthesis closing parenthesis 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 opening parenthesis closing parenthesis. A hospital. The humans had them as most cultures did. Raditz's large frame burst through the front doors, knocking down the automated sliding doors before storming towards the counter. "Fix her," he said, placing the bloody body in front of the receptionist, who screamed. "Cease screaming." The woman just looked terrified, before picking up the phone. "We need Doc CTORS to emergency." When the doctors arrived with a stretcher, they quickly took Violet, carefully however, placing her on the stretcher and checking her pulse. The first doctor paused, his eyebrows knit before looking at Raditz. "I'm sorry, but she's dead." "Unacceptable," was the blunt response. With that, Raditz opened his palm and blasted the doctor to ash. How dare he mock him? What kind of doctor was he anyway? Patients and staff began screaming. "Fix her," he then demanded, grabbing another man in a coat. "I can't, she's dead," the man screamed. A look of disgust and anger came across Raditz's face, before he threw the man through the side of the building. She wasn't dead yet. By now, most of the staff and patients had run for their lives, leaving Raditz alone, as he stormed through several rooms. A half-dozen more staff met Raditz's wrath. But even as he went looking for more doctors to fix Violet, he started to finally calm down. Raditz found himself next to the stretcher, carefully arranging the broken body respectfully. There was a void now, a void as he realized she was very much dead. Vegeta and Nappa. His hand slowly slid from hers. She died only as he came to terms with how he felt. She was taken from him by his own allies. And taken for what? She was just as ruthless as they were. What would have she been not willing to do? Another botched job, Raditz. Well, that's no surprise, given that we sent you to do the job. Vegeta's voice rang in his mind. Raditz felt himself starting to tremble with rage. This planet was pathetic, there was barely any challenges here. Well, except for maybe Raditz. Hey Raditz, I hope the children on this planet didn't give you too hard a time. Nappa's words ranged through his mind now as well. He'd been loyal for so long. He'd never asked for anything, all he'd asked was for respect. They couldn't even give him that. His teeth clenched together as he looked down at the dead woman. What could he do to kill Vegeta and Nappa? He was nothing compared to them. He was weak. If he hadn't been weak, this would have never happened. Failure will not be tolerated, Raditz. Vegeta said, his smirk returning to his features. Neither will weakness. That was it. Something broke behind his eyes as the words were uttered again and again in his mind. There was an inhuman scream of anger, coupled with grief. The whole building rumbled violently, then the whole block as Raditz was completely unable to contain himself. His body blasted through the roof of the building, careful ironically, to have not harmed the corpse of Violet, though not caring for the living patients themselves. His mind felt out across the world, feeling all the powers on the planet centralizing in one space. In the Badlands. An aura surrounding his body, Raditz blasted off towards it, his eyes maddened. Nappa. Vegeta. Opening parenthesis closing parenthesis 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 opening parenthesis closing parenthesis. For me, this was a really difficult chapter to write. Not the part with Vegeta chewing out Raditz, but everything to do with Violet and Raditz, as in my mind it's not simple. To be blunt, Raditz's attraction to Violet is because she's a reflection of a Saiyan. She acts like he'd expect most Saiyan women to act. Now, given her power level is 40, you can obviously guess she doesn't fight like one. But her actions aren't so different. Neither are her attitudes. And let's not forget she's easy on the eyes, and looks familiar to a Saiyan in anatomy. Then when you also take into account the recent help he'd received from humans asking nothing in return, he was bound to be heading towards a disaster like having feelings. Though I hope I was able to show he still has a complete disregard for life that he finds annoying or unimportant. For Colonel Violet herself, it's even more complicated. I think she may be a sociopath, or is at least a borderline sociopath. Which means in reality she may not really be able to feel for Raditz, and I think much of her death scene was feeling bad for herself. She used Raditz as much as she saw Raditz using her. As soon as she figured out that the world was going to end, it was all about saving her own ass. Can she feel for Raditz? I dunno. But it's not entirely important right now as she's dead, and that probably won't change for a while if ever. I'll have to do some STFF with her eventually, whether in flashbacks or the afterlife, as we go along however, as I really liked writing Violet. Their powers were terrible, terrifying even. Everyone had physically felt when they annihilated East City from the map, and that didn't seem anywhere near the limit of their power. Birds flew overhead, in a panic, attempting to escape the coming battle. Animals had a tendency to avoid things which emanated so much power. Piccolo's eyes were locked ahead. He mainly felt one big power, bigger than his by far, but there was another behind that one. Perhaps it was even more terrifying, but he had no way of knowing. They are on their way here, don't be concerned. You've been trained for this, Piccolo informed Gohan. In truth, he'd come to respect Gohan, the son of his enemy. The boy had trained exceptionally, being vastly more powerful than any child he'd ever known of. The kid took well to almost all the techniques he taught him, and he was fast as well. And his hidden power had grown even greater with his training. Piccolo could sense it. He felt a new power. It was close. Looking around briefly just as he removed his weighted clothing, Krillin zipped into view, before flipping and landing in front of them. Hey, it's my dad's friend. Good, Piccolo said. I was wondering if you guys were going to show up, Piccolo remarked. Krillin blinked at the comment. What's that supposed to mean, Piccolo? After that display at Capsule Corporation, what else could I expect? Krillin felt embarrassment as he looked at Piccolo, blinking as he twiddled his fingers together. Well, not exactly our brightest moment, I know. Piccolo just gave a humph in response. Krillin approached Gohan, before smiling at the son of his best friend. Hey, Krillin said with a smile, before looking about for a moment. We didn't have time to talk last time, but are you doing alright? Piccolo's not hurt you, has he? Well, outside of the training, no. Gohan said. Mr. Piccolo is actually a pretty good person. Gohan said with a smile. Krillin just smiled nervously in response, looking between Gohan and Piccolo. Piccolo stood there like a statue and Gohan stood there, well, like a kid trying to act like a statue. It was Tien and Chiatsu who arrived next. You feel those powers moving? Moving that fast, they should have gotten here sooner. Tien said. They made a detour. Piccolo responded. I felt them first move towards Raditz. Great. Raditz is with them too. Krillin said, looking despondent. We'll be ready for him. Tien immediately cut in. Raditz is not with them. Piccolo told them. Everyone looked at one another in shock. But wasn't it Raditz who was waiting for them to arrive? Wasn't that why he'd been trying to gather the Dragon Balls? Krillin felt something was off, like something had gone awry, even if this was good for them. Why the hell wouldn't Raditz have gone along with his buddies? Yamcha asked. His answer was given him to a second later. Because that weakling Raditz needs to get his head on straight. Unfortunately for him, he'll miss out on all the fun, as I doubt any of you will be alive by the time he gets here. Vegeta commented. There was a dark smile appearing across his lips as he and Nappa made their way to the earth, descending from above. Well, would you look at that, all in one place. None of this chasing the rats through the maze. Good, Nappa said with a grin plastered across his face as well. Look at that Nappa. The strongest one is a Namek, no wonder Raditz had so much trouble. Vegeta chuckled. Piccolo's eyes widened. Namek. Yes, it all makes sense now. The Dragon Balls are much like the rumored sacred 7 balls of Namek. He'll be the one who tells us about the Dragon Balls. Vegeta said with a cunning smile. Piccolo was left, himself, in shock. He took in the information, coming to terms with it as he did. He was an alien, somehow he knew it was true. He could feel his connection always to an outside place, and now that place turned out to be a whole other world. The afterlife, Snake's way. Goku launched himself as fast and hard as he could the second he'd been revived, as soon as he discovered that his journey back to Earth would be from King Kai's planet itself. He raced through the heavens as quickly as he could, knowing full well if he wasted but a moment, his friends could die at the hands of the Saiyans. Idly, he felt his eyes trace across the heavens for one moment, recalling the figure that confronted him on his way to King Kai's, a hateful creature that wished he and his family and friends dead. The words rang in his mind as it had when he first was confronted by the creature. No, he'd grown strong enough now that he would stop any threat to the Earth, or to his friends and family. He just had to get there in time. It was in that moment that he froze, seeing the figure appearing in front of him once more. I think not. The Saiyans are not done their work. My plans will not fail because of the incompetence of others. If you just never get to Earth in time, they will die. The voice whispered in his mind. It was then that Goku noticed something. This creature had a halo. I don't have time for this. Goku responded, his features tightening to a serious look. He felt the power behind this hooded figure. Well, that is too bad, Goku. My power lords over yours. And my power only grows with every passing day. There is no way I will let you past me. That's fine, Goku said, smiling knowingly. But I don't have time to fight you. With that, Goku flew straight down through the yellow clouds. What? No. The figure knew full well Goku knew how to escape hell, and return to the way station. All he'd done was buy the Saiyans time. Opening parenthesis closing parenthesis 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 opening parenthesis closing parenthesis. 25 minutes later, Earth. The last Saibaman exploded in the sky as Piccolo annihilated it from existence. Bits of Yamcha had littered the landscape with the kamikaze attack. Nappa was, to say the least, not impressed by them crushing a bunch of weak Saibaman. "Hey Vegeta, I'll take care of these weaklings," he promised. In truth, Nappa just wanted to enjoy himself. All of these fools together couldn't touch him. The Namek was likely the only one there who could offer anything that resembled a challenge, and even then he wasn't that impressed. "Very well Nappa, I'll let you off your leash. But remember, no killing the Namek. He's going to tell us exactly where those Dragon Balls are." There was a nod from Nappa, before his large frame shifted, appraising his victims. Each one of them was something to be used up. He wanted to see what these weaklings could do. Outside of the Namek, he'd appraised Three Eyes was the next strongest, followed by Q Ball. They were all cautious, if anything they were more cautious than he'd expected. It was probably because of their fighting with Raditz. Raditz had already spoiled a batch of enemies. He couldn't even kill them. He failed to see why Vegeta hadn't killed Raditz as well. Normally he wasn't so sentimental. The fool was lucky to have just gotten off with a lesson. But now, which one to pick? He needed to make an example of the strongest one he could, which meant either Q Ball or Three Eyes. "You idiots have to promise not to hold back," Nappa mocked. "I want to see if you might be able to give me a rash." "You don't need our help to get a rash," Krillin responded. "Ah, Q Ball just nominated himself," Nappa thought with a smirk. Without another word Nappa began to rush towards Krillin, his bulky frame blasting off towards him in a full sprint. It was then that the Namek interfered, Piccolo's body zipping in front of his charge. "Let's do this." With a blasting off of his own, Piccolo shot towards Nappa. Save for Vegeta, everyone observing was collectively having trouble tracking the two warriors. Piccolo knew he was outmatched, but he'd had a lot of experience over the last year dealing with stronger opponents. He hadn't fully understood Nappa's power, but he did know he had to keep his allies alive to help him with this giant Saiyan. The two locked in battle within seconds. Piccolo's fist collided with Nappa's gauntlet, as the larger fighter blocked. The two froze in place for a millisecond before both moved back, moving at blinding speeds before they collided again. It was Piccolo's role to try to keep the initiative, which meant being as aggressive as possible. Zipping through the air, the Namek came about with a sharp kick towards Nappa's head only to find the giant had ducked. As soon as he did, Piccolo's eyes widened, before glowing, blasting two bolts down towards Nappa. The Saiyan disappeared, moving so fast even Piccolo couldn't follow for a moment. A kick, no doubt to entertain Nappa's sense of irony, came in, striking Piccolo in the head. The Green Warrior's body flew back, before Nappa appeared above him, hands up and ready to make an axe handle smash. Too easy. With those words, however, a bolt of energy collided with his frame, coming from Tien. The Hulk stopped in his tracks as Piccolo fell to the ground and rolled, before ending on his feet. Whilst Piccolo recovered, Tien went on the attack. The three-eyed warrior flew directly into Nappa, striking out with a strong of fists and kicks. Each blow was dodged or blocked. Tien's hands hammered against blocks and deflections as Nappa started to laugh. "Look Vegeta, this one is a comedian." Vegeta started to smirk as well. "Here, let me show you how it's done," Nappa shouted. He raised his knee to block another kick from Tien. What came next was a vicious headbutt, crashing into Tien's skull, the impact surely concussing his opponent. Tien was left in agony, he could barely think or move after the hit. With a brutally powered-up fist, Nappa punched him in the gut, causing Tien to lurch forward and cough up spit, blood and phlegm. Nappa then dropped an elbow into his back, sending Tien helplessly falling to the earth, crashing into it violently. This guy is too much. Krillin muttered to himself. Gohan, Chiatsu, stick with me. We've got to attack together. And to think. Nappa laughed. I'm just warming up. Piccolo suddenly felt something in his stomach, something cold that shifted about nervously. Just warming up. Language resources. When Nappa made touchdown on the ground, he started to focus. Power started to slowly gather around him, as the earth began to rumble. Gohan felt terrified. This beast had just beaten Mr. Piccolo up front, and then proceeded to deal with Tien like he was nothing. And now the world was shaking itself apart as he powered himself up. Nappa started to roar as his frame shifted, power flowing around him. Piccolo felt his teeth grind together as he braced himself. Tien barely managed to bring himself to his feet, assuming a weakened fighting stance. To Krillin, this was the time to attack, not to let him power up. He shot forward, Chiatsu in tow. Gohan, however, was left behind, petrified by what he was feeling and seeing, trembling even as he was left otherwise paralyzed. Krillin only noticed at the last moment that Gohan wasn't there with them. Just as he'd attacked the beast himself. Nappa's frame shifted aside, elbowing Krillin out of the way a moment later, just as Chiatsu started to unleash a barrage of energy bolts into the giant. The series of blasts rained down from above, showering Nappa and blasting away rock and earth. It was then that Krillin joined in, his body bounced up from the ground, flipping in mid and turning to Nappa. Kamehameha. The blue blast wave joined with the series of energy attacks, blasting into the middle of the smoke cloud in a huge blue fireball. At last, Chiatsu, exhausted, stopped firing. Chiatsu, get back! Tien shouted, the only one to notice what happened. Chiatsu looked towards Tien, before looking up. Nappa floated there, his body crackling with power. You little pale bastard! He snarled angrily, before unleashing a massive blast wave. Chiatsu! Tien shouted out as the wave hit his friend. Only a second later it was clear that Chiatsu had been killed by it, his body disappearing in the wave before the blast came crashing to earth. Take cover! Piccolo shouted, flying back immediately, grabbing the petrified Gohan as he did. Tien barely responded in time himself. The blast wave was staggering, a huge explosion on the scale of a megaton going off in the heart of their battlefield. A crater formed the size of a small football field. In the heart of the blast, Vegeta still stood, exactly where he'd been, completely unaffected. Krillin landed next to Piccolo and Gohan. The two had been sent flying by the blast, along with Tien. That's crazy. Krillin managed to finally say. Look at the size of it. All that from one attack. How are we going to even slow this guy down? Krillin asked, his eyes unable to leave the crater. Tien sat there, only catatonic for a moment. Chiatsu was gone, just gone. When he looked towards the crater and then above to the snickering Nappa, he felt something snap. Slowly the three-eyed warrior began to raise. I think we need a new battlefield. I think I may have just ruined this one as badly as I did that pale Skinner loser. Nappa stated, crossing his arms before starting to bellow out laughter. Did any of you idiots think you could take on the two strongest Saiyans in the universe? With how pathetic all of you are. His laughter only intensified. Tien felt a rage overcoming him, focusing all his power. Energy began to slowly ripple off his skin. Tien, don't do it. Krillin urged, before his comrade took off, blasting into the air at high speeds towards the brute who'd killed his friend. His connection to Chiatsu was profound, and to see this monster kill and mock him was too much for Tien to handle right now. He would die if he had to avenge his friend. This monster was going to be stopped here and now. The two foes collided, Tien pushing all his power to the limit as he lashed out at Nappa. Their limbs locked in Tien's desperate struggle. Unlike before, where Nappa had blocked and dodged every blow, something happened. Nappa blocked and dodged as he had before, until a violent and wild right hook connected with his jaw. His head shifted, violently rocking back and to the left. Before he could recover, Tien had already dropped a knee into his stomach, and followed up by another vicious punch. The first real blows to be landed on the Saiyan monster. Nappa was left shocked. He'd let this low-class human worm hit him. Anger and hate boiled up inside the Saiyan, his eyes almost cracking with it. The response Tien would receive in the coming moments would be overwhelming. Piccolo looked to Krillin and Gohan. Tien is going to burn out soon. And Nappa is still too far ahead of us. We've got to intervene, but only when he's distracted. Vegeta overheard the conversation, quietly smirking to himself. Good idea. Nappa is far too strong for you bunch of weaklings to take head on. Exploit his weakness, he doesn't use that head of his much. Vegeta remarked. Piccolo turned to Vegeta, looking at him warily. We'll see who is outright strongest once Goku gets here. Goku. Vegeta responded. Who's that? Piccolo just chuckled. You'll find out soon, shorty. In the distance, the sound of Tien shrieking in pain was heard, immediately taking Piccolo's attention back to the duel in the sky. Tien's body looked worn, as Nappa laid into him with another vicious kick to the side. It looked like he was hewing Tien in half, like cutting down a tree. One hand held his ribs while the other weakly tried to defend. Another brutal body blow was landed, this time by Nappa's fist. I'll rip you in half, weakling, that'll show you for thinking you could challenge me. Nappa snarled. This time, however, the blow sent Tien flipping through the air, his body slamming into the core of the crater Nappa had blasted out when he killed Chiatsu. Opening his mouth widely, Nappa began forming energy for his break cannon. It was time for Tien to die. With a shock wave of energy following his lightning-fast movements, however, Piccolo appeared to his side. Forgot about me, ugly? Piccolo asked, before landing the very kick he'd tried to land at the beginning of the fight. The blow smashed into Nappa's head, sending the massive mouth blast flying in another direction, annihilating a small mountain. Krillin then came in above him, dropping both his fists down on Nappa's skull, sending him flying downwards. Gohan was supposed to next. Moss. He couldn't even finish the words to his attack when he made eye contact with the furious Nappa. Gohan, what are you doing? Do it now, Piccolo shouted. Vegeta just started to laugh at Gohan's fear. Nappa recovered in the air, turning towards Piccolo and Krillin. You two think that stupid plan would work on me? He shouted angrily. Piccolo felt a deep disappointment he couldn't describe. He'd spent a year training Gohan for this moment. If he'd attacked, there was a chance they could have finished this. Nappa's guard was down only seconds ago, even a relatively weak blast could have done serious damage to him. Was it a year wasted? Gohan may have just been too weak in character to be a warrior. Piccolo froze at the thought, feeling almost betrayed in that moment, not only by Gohan but by the bond he felt they'd formed over the last year. Now, Nappa was going on the attack. Sweeping in, the giant collided first with Krillin. The human warrior found himself quickly flying back under little control. With the human out of the way, it was clear he was taking aim at the Namek next. Piccolo snarled as he began to bring his power to the surface. Energy waves licked off his skin, his eyes narrowed on Nappa and his teeth ground together. Nappa couldn't read the power level, his scouter having already been disposed of. Vegeta couldn't feel the Namek either, but he could tell this was going to be good. I can see you want a challenge. Piccolo started, his voice strained. Come on then, Nappa. The Namek's body then braced itself for combat, clawed hands prepared to meet in battle against his superior foe. It was clear that the other fighters couldn't help him, either because they couldn't, or in Gohan's case, because he wouldn't. The last thought was particularly painful before in a blur of light and speed, the strongest defender on the earth currently alive, threw himself into a battle he knew he couldn't win. Opening parenthesis closing parenthesis 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 opening parenthesis closing parenthesis. Goku's body soared through the air as he flew past the second layer of hell, finally coming to his far more familiar settings finally. It'd still take hours to finish getting through all this, now that he was running behind. He just hoped the others were holding on, that's all that mattered now. His body blasted over the blood pond as several ogres looked up towards him, two of them nervous. Uh-oh, not this guy again. Opening parenthesis closing parenthesis 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 opening parenthesis closing parenthesis. Krillin's body went flying, this time crashing into the ground below and bouncing violently. In the air, Piccolo had barely managed a defense, blocking several attacks by Nappa, only to be overwhelmed by a quickly fired ki blast, and then kicked away. The two warriors hovered, squaring off against one another. Moving at a speed only Nappa and Vegeta could follow, Piccolo moved in for his next round of attacks. He struck out violently, catching Nappa in the cheek, before his other jabs found their way towards his midsection. Nappa's armor absorbed the damage along with his frame, before he slammed both his forearms into Piccolo's shoulders. The sounds of dislocated bones could be heard if close enough. The kick that followed sent Piccolo back in the air. It's pathetic that you are the only one here who can even block one of my attacks. How these weaklings have survived this long is a miracle. How they even survived against Raditz is just a pathetic judgment of Raditz's uselessness. Nappa barked. On the ground below, however, Tien's hands were clasped together, concentrating power, both his energy and even his very soul. If someone didn't stop Nappa, they'd all be dead, and he was going to stop him even if it cost his life. Suddenly his body rocketed into the air, hovering above Nappa. The energy in his hands electrified by its sheer force. This was his only shot to do this. Nappa. When Nappa looked up, all he saw was the human in a funny pose. 3 eyes. He shot back mockingly. Tri-beam. The energy slowly crackled from his hands, before exploding out in one huge, massive wave. It seemed to almost be as powerful as the blast Nappa had used to kill Chiatsu. Piccolo could sense the power of the attack, immediately taking flight away from Nappa. Nappa, for his part, had thought the attack would be smaller, something be easily deflected as most of Tien's S had been. Instead he now stared what seemed to be death in the face. The blast hit, it was like a wall of energy, and he'd not prepared himself to dodge. Everyone watched in shock as piles of rocks collapsed in on themselves even kilometers away because of the sheer force of the. Inside the crater Nappa had created only minutes ago, A new, deeper, fresh crater appeared. At the heart of the crater, the armorless Nappa lay there, his body looking roughed up, slightly burnt. His face was still in shock, even in pain for a moment, blinking several times before his body slowly started to rise. Tien, however, was spent, not just in energy, but in life. No, Tien managed, before falling from the sky, unable to keep flight, or keep his life. His corpse hit the ground within seconds, all there could feel the life slip from him. Tien, Krillin shouted. Nappa's boot hit the ground, causing it to break apart under it, his eyes ridden with anger and hate. Nappa, maybe you should be more careful, at this rate one of these earth worms may humiliate you. Vegeta said, his smile evident as he found the entire scene amusing. Nappa started to breathe aggressively, his body trembling with the kind of anger only hurt pride could breed. You're all dead, he sneered. By the way, Nappa, I think I have a new plan. Vegeta said bluntly. We don't need that Namek anymore. The sacred balls of Namek may actually be real, in fact I'd bet our immortality on it. That means we can kill this one and destroy this planet, no problem. Piccolo knew what that meant, as Nappa made eye contact with him, and gave him a nefarious smile. Opening parenthesis closing parenthesis 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 opening parenthesis closing parenthesis. Unknown location. Were you able to slow down Goku? One of the hooded figures asked. No, he escaped through hell. I have not been able to ambush him since. He will escape soon. I am very disappointed. And who are you to be disappointed in me, you pathetic worm? You'd be nothing without me. I suggest you remember that. The voice snarled. Yes, of course. Forgive my poor choice in words. Opening parenthesis closing parenthesis 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 opening parenthesis closing parenthesis. He's too strong, Krillin managed to say, before he collapsed once again. Gohan was half buried in a mountain, carefully pulling himself free and staggering forward. His eyes drifted to Krillin, and then to Piccolo, who was barely able to stand at this point. They'd been no match for Nappa. The big brute had his share of injures, cuts, bruises, and scorch marks, but his power was unaltered from when the fight had started. Everything they'd done, all the sacrifices they'd made seemed like it was for nothing. Yamcha, Chiatsu, Tien, they all died for nothing. Rage was beginning to bubble inside of Gohan's mind as he felt the losses of his father's friends grip him. Nappa kicked Krillin aside as if he were nothing. So what's next? Nappa asked. This was really disappointing. I was at least hoping to get a few more minutes of fun out of the Namek over there. Piccolo had managed to stagger forward, glaring at Nappa from the side. Just wait until Goku gets here. Language resources. Goku, 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 all you idiots talk about is Goku. Has it occurred to you he's not coming? Nappa mocked. He'd be here by now, wouldn't he? Nappa then just gave a half smile to Piccolo. No one is coming to save you, Cue Ball, or the brat. Piccolo almost snarled at the words. Mr. Piccolo, you've gotta get out of here. Gohan urged. If you die, the dragon can't be summoned anymore. Please, Mr. Piccolo, we won't be able to wish back our friends. Vegeta just smirked. Nappa, this kid thinks he can hold you off long enough to save the Namek. Nappa just flexed, grinning. Well, kid, let's see how well you can hold me off. Powering the same attack that killed Chiatsu, energy began to form in his right hand. Get ready for hell, kid. Gohan stood there, completely unable to move as Nappa prepared his attack, another fighter down. There was a blur in the distance as Piccolo, Gohan, and Krillin felt a new power. Oh no, not him too, Krillin said. Nappa stopped, noticing the blue bolt coming towards them. Raditz. Raditz, get your own victims. Nappa laughed, turning his attention back to crushing Gohan. Vegeta watched as Raditz rocketed towards Nappa, only realizing at the last second what was about to happen. What? Nappa. Behind. Nappa turned his head up towards Vegeta, just as the blur of Raditz almost in slow motion threw his right arm out, fist swinging towards Nappa's head. The impact sent blood splattering out of Nappa's mouth, his body being sent flying off towards a scattered formation of rocks. His head was ringing as he tried to get a hold of what just happened. Nappa. Get ready to die. Nappa's body was sent flying through the air, his head moving at a slight angle from the way he'd been hit. There was an angry growl from the giant as he continued his dive through the air. The attacker, a member of his very species, his one-time ally, took off after him, the ground beneath him being blasted by the energy coming from his body. He'd never asked Vegeta for anything, he was a good soldier. Raditz had taken every humiliation the others had thrown at him, constantly reminding him of his lower fighting potential, of the status of his birth. Every time there was a horrible duty given to them, he was the one to perform it first because he was privileged by his low birth. All he'd asked Vegeta to do was spare one human, just one. A human, ironically, that was helping their cause no less. A woman who he even found himself growing increasingly attached to. Only with her death did he realize just how attached he'd become. Raditz knew full well why Vegeta had done it. It was to show dominance over him, to remind him of his place, a test of loyalty and an act of vindictive cruelty. Well, what was his place? Was it at the bottom of a food chain which Prince Vegeta was at the top of? To forever be a slave to a man who wished to fight Frieza, but was too afraid to do it? A man who never showed him respect. He would most certainly die, but if he could kill Nappa, that would leave Vegeta in the state he deserved. He'd be utterly alone in the universe, not a lapdog to call his own. Vegeta for his part now slowly growled to himself as he watched Nappa go flying. His eyes critically locked onto Raditz before he reached down and picked up his scouter. He wanted to see exactly what was going on. Clicking on the device, the readings began coming in. Ha! How pathetic. Nappa will crush him as easily as he crushed the Namek. Piccolo staggered to Gohan's side, turning his head to watch what was unfolding between Nappa and Raditz. I don't get it. Why is Raditz attacking them? Is he on our side now? Gohan asked. Piccolo could almost feel the anger that was fueling Raditz at that moment. He wasn't protecting the Earth. Nappa and Vegeta had clearly done something to slight him. He was attacking because of his wounded pride. No, Gohan, don't trust him for a second. He's only on one side, his own. Raditz's furious cry echoed out as he chased after Nappa, who was just now regaining his own control in the air. Raditz, you fool. I'm going to break your bones, and Nappa was cut off by a swift uppercut. The blow landed with precision under his jaw, snapping his mouth shut in mid-speech and sending Nappa directly up. Feeling woozy for only a moment, focusing his power, Nappa started to level off, preparing for Raditz's next. Blinking, he looked ahead expecting Raditz to predictably be following him. He looked behind briefly, not noticing him there either. Instead, his eyes traced down to Raditz being exactly where he'd just been. Raditz's right hand was in the air as his face looked as if he was concentrating. A red swirl of energy forming in the hand a moment later told Nappa the attack was coming. He scoffed. Please. Not an energy attack. Anything but that. Now the surprise is over, Raditz. He chuckled. Raditz had learned something, however. He'd seen how he'd been beaten, twice before. His opponents focused their energy into a concentrated point. Before, when he attacked with an energy bolt, it wasn't gathered in the same way, it was just fired, and he guessed it was very similar for Nappa. Nappa's scoff at his gathering of energy made him feel a certain level of confidence. Vegeta for his part felt his eyebrows raise. 3,500. No wait. 4,200. The scouter continued to blip as the red orb in Raditz's hand reached its full potential, red energy bolts rippling around it as the Saiyan looked almost in pain from focusing on it. 4,900. Nappa. That attack is almost at 5,000. Looking down at Vegeta and feeling something chill in his blood, Nappa took the number into account. 5,000. How was that possible? This was Raditz, a low level. His eyes looked down at Raditz, still a bit in shock as he saw him still in the process of focusing. Something's gotta be wrong with the scouter. There is no way that attack is. Saturday. Raditz almost seemed to hop forward before launching his arm. Crush. The world went red as far as Nappa could see. He felt confused as to how this was happening. However, he did understand perfectly how there was a massive highly powered energy attack coming towards him, that he got completely. What he didn't understand was how this attack was coming from Raditz. He was only as powerful as the Namek was, and the Namek hadn't thrown an attack like this at him. Nappa's pride, however, was not something to be underestimated. With a growl of anger, he focused his own energy, his body covering itself once again with a golden aura. Come on then, low level. He shouted, thrusting his hands down in defense as the swirling red orb continued its path towards him. When the impact was made, the brutal swelling of energy releasing could be heard for several seconds before the attack detonated. Piccolo saw this coming at the last moment. Shit. He grabbed Gohan, before rocketing over and grabbing Krillin. Gotta move. He urged himself on before taking off as quickly as he could. The sky turned red, it almost seemed like. Rock formations for miles began collapsing, before the shock emanated out from the center of the attack. The blast could be heard like a clapping boom almost across the continent, being seen from space. Finally, the ground beneath the explosion shattered like glass, before being blown further into itself, cratering out yet another huge area of the Badlands. Standing near the heart of the explosion, Vegeta's scouter still beeping information to him as he grit his teeth together. Nappa was an idiot to challenge the blast and not attempt a dodge. If Nappa couldn't handle Raditz, then he deserved his fate. The moment he was extinguished, however, he would break Raditz in two and as his scattered remains in orbit. Feeling depleted from the exertion of firing the blast, Raditz stood, ready as he could be. Now as the red began to fade and a smoking ruin was left in the sky, he knew he needed to press. He could still feel Nappa's energy. Bracing himself, he took off at full speed, flying through the air as fast as he could before entering the huge cloud left by his. There was the sound of thunder a moment later. Nappa went flying out of the cloud, heading towards the earth. His body looked burnt, bloodied, his armored gauntlets were completely destroyed. He hit the earth back first and lay there a moment, just wincing in pain. Vegeta just shook his head at the sight, before Raditz came down after him, dropping both knees into his gut. Bursting to life, Nappa, his mouth gaping in pain, his eyes almost hollowed out from it. Raditz. He finally gasped. You're going to die, for these Earth, weaklings. He managed. A disgusted sneer appeared on Raditz's face. Hardly. I'm just here to kill you and Vegeta. With those spiteful words, he began to bear his fists down on Nappa. The first strike a vicious one, punching him in the left cheek as hard as he could. Nappa's head dug into the ground, before Raditz struck again. Each strike seemed to increase the pace in one he threw punches, blood came away with his hands after another volley, before he just stopped thinking as he was swinging, he even cried out with rage like some kind of possessed animal. It felt good to have Nappa's blood on his hands. Any sense of comradeship he once had been stripped away. With each blow all Raditz could think of was revenge, and his thirst for it only heightened as his bloodlust tried to be satiated. Each vicious strike made the next one stronger. He felt his teeth grit together and snarl. Nappa finally caught one of his arms. The other one still tried to strike as well, before it was caught too. Nappa's head looked like it had had better days, his left eye was swollen shut and bleeding from the socket, blood now gushed from his nose, and two of his teeth were chipped. His face was written with the kind of fury only a Saiyan in battle could know. He shoved Raditz off of him before climbing to his feet. His whole body felt like it had just been compressed, then decompressed, then compressed again. Raditz had really just done a number on him, more damage than all those weaklings before. The blast had fried him. If he hadn't managed a defense he'd had died from it. Even then however his whole body was in agony from it. The blows to the head and the knees in the chest however, were just adding insult to injury. So Raditz finally grew a spine, but only after they killed a human, and shamed him as he deserved to be shamed. Nappa's eyes began cracking with anger as he breathed in heavily, unable to control just how furious he was with Raditz. How dare he? And how stupid was he? Did he think he was going to kill him? Let alone Vegeta. You low-class bastard. Nappa finally shouted, his arm tensing as he balled a fist in front of himself. He couldn't find words at how mad he was. How dare you challenge me? I'm a super elite. A thrill rushed through Raditz as he gathered himself, shifting his legs and arms to brace for an attack from Nappa. With his opponent preparing for him, Nappa finally shifted his bulky body to face Raditz completely. Without another word between the two, Nappa charged like a furious bull. The first strike was blocked by Raditz, stopping the huge fist from coming to. However, Nappa immediately followed up, breaking past Raditz's guard with a headbutt, slamming forehead to forehead. Raditz clearly came away with the worst of the exchange, before a huge fist slammed into his gut. Raditz was sent up into the air almost 2 meters from the impact, and before he could fall he was kicked into the side of a newly formed crater. Walking towards him aggressively, Nappa seemed to have nothing but angry mutterings. Sitting up, Raditz scowled at Nappa. I'll kill you yet, Nappa. Scoffing as he got to the sitting Saiyan, Nappa towered over him like a mountain. Raditz saw the look on Nappa's face, knowing he was now looking for the death blow. Raising his fist as a golden aura burst around it. Die, you traitor! Nappa froze in mid-swing, his eyes going distant as sweat came down over his face. He looked sick, like he was going to vomit. The glow disappeared from his arm. Even Vegeta winced whilst in the midst of scowling. Mr. Piccolo, that didn't seem very fair. Piccolo for his part however, gave a rare smile, a broad one at that. But not undeserved. There Nappa was, frozen in space for those precious seconds. Before the giant Saiyan froze, Raditz had grabbed hold of his opponent's leg with his left hand, and then punched his square in the groin with the right. Bringing himself to his feet as Nappa barely staggered back, Raditz chuckled. What's wrong, Nappa? Raditz managed to say, shaking his hand off for a moment. You dirty bastard. Nappa winced in pain, his voice several tones higher. This had bought him the time he needed to get reorganized, to regroup. It was too good however, because the look of sickened pain on Nappa's face was priceless. With that, Raditz opened up his next attack, diving into Nappa's frame with his knee out, cracking into his chest, before striking him with a hard elbow to the side of the head. The giant lumbered for a moment before being sent to the ground. When Nappa found his feet, he'd seemingly recovered from his previous groin injury. "I hate you," Nappa finally bellowed, before his mouth opened widely after the last word. Taking only a second to realize what it was, Raditz tried his best to defend. The world went white for a brief second, before Nappa's attack launched, the brake cannon. It was too close to dodge. Shit. The beam burned from Nappa's mouth, smashing into Raditz like a tidal wave that simply washed him away. Raditz felt his body almost beginning to burn, his clothes tearing and burning away inside the beam. Inside the light he saw his own death. No, not like this. The burning ray of blue power flew across the landscape, slamming into the distance as another huge explosion was seen. Debris flew past Nappa despite the distance. "Nappa!" Vegeta barked. The huge Saiyan stopped as soon as Vegeta spoke. "I am detecting a new power level on its way here." Piccolo's head perked up. "No way, I can feel it, it's heading this way." The Namek uttered. "Nappa, stop wasting time, especially now, finish those three off." Opening parenthesis closing parenthesis 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 opening parenthesis closing parenthesis. Cold fingers, now covered in his own blood, pushed against the rocks which covered him. What an attack! He let his arms go lax for a moment. He might die from these kinds of injuries. It was almost a peaceful thought. He was bleeding, badly, from his head, right arm, and torso. He mainly felt shame from his inability to at least kill Nappa. As if killing Nappa would somehow vindicate him before Vegeta killed him. How did he let himself get this far? To the point where he was laying here bleeding to death because of Nappa. Where did it all start? Did it start with the woman? Did it start from just coming to the earth? Was this a curse of some sort? His father would be disgraced by him right now, dying here for no reason to stop beings far more powerful than himself. Pride. Pride had been the cause of all this. It overwhelmed his loyalty even. He was slighted and wouldn't allow his pride to take yet another blow. It must have been his selfishness that drove him to this. He was finally beginning to feel regret for attacking Nappa in a blind rage. Would he have done so differently than Vegeta? Vegeta saw his weakness, and saw how it could lead to exactly what was happening right now. Which was exactly why Violet had to die. The human woman who slaughtered her own people for an opportunity to survive. After all she'd done, he would have saved her from this rock. An image of her flashed before his eyes. It was an image of her still dying after Nappa had collapsed the side of the mountain on her. He felt his fist ball. No, it wasn't just pride. It's not her fault at all, Prince Vegeta. Raditz immediately spoke up. "I disagree. Raditz, kill the woman." The words rang through his mind. As soon as he heard them, he knew she was dead. He tried to reason with Vegeta, pointlessly. Nappa did his job for him. They killed her. Oh, I get it now. The genocidal maniac who sells planets claims he doesn't get why he's sparring someone. You are terrible at concealing your feelings. Violet said, sounding bored. Feelings. He knew then exactly what she was implying. She was implying he was infatuated with her, which was probably correct. He felt his eyes drift ahead for a moment. Thinking of her death was painful, something he couldn't explain to himself still. Or rather, something he couldn't admit to himself entirely. She had been a warrior, strong and efficient. The humans didn't deserve her to be among their ranks. I've killed a lot of people. Hundreds of people, she said weakly. I've killed people who thought they were my friends. I've used everyone to get more. You were my ticket to staying alive. I was going to make it. Survive. A lot of good that did. She said, before a cough full of blood came up. Quote. Raditz felt emptiness suddenly, complete emptiness. She'd followed him, dragging herself by his side simply because she saw it as her only way to survive. Her insights made things tolerable on this planet full of humans. He even protected her from tanks, aircraft, automated turrets, and he did so because she had captured him in her own way. Clearly the opposite hadn't occurred, she'd just wanted to survive. But he'd found that to be her more endearing trait. His fondness perhaps even touched on a word a Saiyan rarely, if ever mentioned. The thought rolled through his mind unfiltered. Woman, he repeated to himself quietly as her image faded before his eyes in the darkness he was in. The blood loss was settling in. His hand moved briefly against the rock, just as when he tried to catch her falling head. And just as before, there was no answer. Opening parenthesis closing parenthesis 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 opening parenthesis closing parenthesis. Nappa started to chuckle as he looked at the three remaining defenders. You heard the prince, I've got to crush you. He chuckled. He looked even like he'd recovered from Raditz's previous. Now the only question is who to start with first. Piccolo growled to himself, bracing his body. He was almost out of power, but he had to try and keep Nappa at bay. They just had to hold on for a few more minutes and Goku would be there. Before Nappa could attack, however, Gohan had already launched past Piccolo, flying straight at Nappa. He wanted to protect Piccolo and Krillin. Krillin was in no state to fight at all, and if Piccolo died, not only would his best friend be gone, but the Dragon Balls with him. Gohan. The tiny body flew with all his strength towards the Saiyan beast, hearing Piccolo's shout behind him but ignoring it. His small hand connected with Nappa's abdomen, but to no real effect. Nappa raised both hands above his head, before bringing them down violently on the boy. Gohan's frame was crushed into the ground, his left shoulder looking broken. Watching with a mixture of disgust and horror, Piccolo prepared to step in, as depleted as he was. It was when Nappa booted Gohan's body flying off to the side and grinned at Piccolo that he became truly enraged. Piccolo then noticed Nappa's hand outstretched, pointing towards Gohan. I wonder how much harder you'll fight after this. Nappa declared, as a wave of energy chased after Gohan. Piccolo's eyes bulged for a moment, before with all his remaining energy he took off, trying to intercept the blast. He managed to get there just in time, his body intercepting the blast, as waves of deadly energy rolled over him. Gohan was barely conscious at the time, his head only just looking up in time to see his own death, but instead seeing Piccolo's. The landscape blasted away around them, leaving a massive trail of destruction. Piccolo had felt all he'd learned of Gohan in those moments rushing forward. Of the boy taken from everything he knew, forced into the wild and surviving. Of a child who'd never even seen a punch thrown, and yet mastered combat. But most of all, the thing that drove him to save this boy's life in exchange for his own, was the fact that no matter how cruel or vile he was to Gohan, no matter what he put him through, Gohan had been nothing but kind and even caring to him. He'd even put his own life at risk just to save his. It was something the Namekian could never forget. The son of his greatest enemy was the closest thing to family he'd ever had. In the blast wave, Piccolo felt agony as he'd never felt in his life. It stripped all the energy from him just to hold on, and to keep Gohan from harm. It was his last act. As the dust settled, Piccolo was left standing there, only barely. He'd done it. He'd saved Gohan. And he collapsed, his clothes barely a remnant of clothes. Gohan was laying there, helpless himself. Piccolo's head barely managed to turn to look at him. I'm sorry, Gohan. Gohan looked at Piccolo, seeing Piccolo splattered with his own purple blood. He couldn't find words for his green friend. But Mr. Piccolo. Gohan said weakly. You saved me. Piccolo smiled sadly. Not for long. Gohan. You are the only friend I've ever had. Get out of here. Gohan. Gohan saw the tears in Piccolo's eyes, and felt his own beginning to swell. Within a few seconds, Gohan saw Piccolo's head nod off. Unable to move his own body, even with his rage and grief, Gohan just let out an anguish cry. Ah, how sad. Nappa cut in with a laugh. The ground started to rumble, however. Krillin felt weak. He looked up towards what was happening as Nappa looked about in all different directions. Vegeta, what the hell is that? Vegeta immediately moved up, clicking the scouter, before scowling. Can't you do anything right, Nappa? Vegeta barked furiously. Nappa turned, fearfully towards Vegeta. But, I've done everything you've. The ground exploded in front of Nappa, revealing Raditz as he'd broken through the ground beneath the battlefield. Nappa blinked, looking directly at Raditz. How are you, Ali? Double Sunday. Raditz looked like shit. His body was bleeding and his posture looked weak. His clothes were almost completely destroyed, having only shreds of a shirt left, and his pants had effectively turned to jeans. However, the golden energy wave that left his hands did not look as weak as he did. At close range, Nappa was unable to raise his defense in time.